I always wanted to be what everybody else wanted me to be. I always showed up the way I thought people wanted me to be. And that was not me. That was the least congruent version of who I am.
The world never judges us based on our intent. They only ever judge us based on what our words, actions, and behaviors communicate to them.
I need to become the millionaire. I need to have a business. I need to do these things because when I have done that, then people will say, oh, well, he's successful, so now we should listen to what he has to say.
It's difficult sometimes when we live behind shame and insecurity and lack of worth to be able to see the value that we've added in the times when we've felt that way.
On Easter Sunday, 6 men walked into my restaurant and held us up in an armed robbery. One of the men put me down on my hands and knees, put a gun to my face, and told me,
welcome back, everybody, to Flipping the Lid. You know what we do here by now. We like to jump into the real, raw conversations with some of the most influential and impactful people on this planet. You know, sometimes there's just a really special connection that takes place in an instant with somebody. And you know it. It feels deep and it's real. And our guest today, I had that exact moment with, except that every moment I've ever had with him since has felt the exact same way. It started at a very simple introduction through a mutual friend from Amberley Lago. And within 2 seconds, I think he was complimenting my Chuck Taylors and deciding and discussing how cool it was going to be as fathers and kids and playing Nintendo. But as I've gotten to know him and being able to witness him and his wife show up at events, the authenticity, the realness, the depth, and the real transformation that takes place just in their presence is just evident and obvious. And this man has been recognized in this case. He's been named as a top 5 coach, has an awesome show, but most importantly, he's one of the most epic and loving humans that I think I've had the privilege of interacting with. And so, Rudi, my friend, I am so excited to have you here with us today.
oh my God, what an honor and a privilege to spend some time in your space, brother. Thank you for having me.
Well, every time we have chatted, I just feel like our relationship that already started in a deep place continues to just bond even further. And we've had a few interactions since we met in person. I had the chance to come on your show, and every time we're together, it just feels so natural and so real. And I know this is just the beginning of what is going to be a long relationship of mutual impact together. My friend, the only question that I ask every guest on this show is, outside of however I introduced you and the little bit I said about you, who are you in your words?
Man, what a great question. And I know that this is a question that comes up in your show. And I was thinking about, well, how would I even answer who am I in my own words? And I couldn't come to anything when I initially had thought the question. But I think that that's because we're always changing and we're always growing, and every day we're someone new. And today, Rudi is somebody who is very much heart-led, who is focused on creating impact out and in the world. And when I say that, I want to clarify. And what I mean by that is, I'm just somebody who wants to, in every moment, in every interaction, whether it's with my kids, the mailman, the grocery store, an incredible conversation with you today, is just leave it better than I found it. And that is who I am in this moment, in this time, and in this space.
So I can appreciate the nuance and the specificity of how you answered that. And I want to say I agree completely with this constant evolution that takes place in every given moment. You know, it's also part of the reason I was so intentional to discuss the moment that we had and every moment that we've experienced since, because I like to say that in so many ways, you and I both show up in a similar description to what you said. But here's where I want to challenge you just a little bit, okay? And this is a positive challenge. You say this is who I am in this moment, but my sense is that this is who you have been for a very long time. And so though it seems, and you ground it into this moment of reality, I appreciate that. But as you identify with this current description of self, how long in your life has that one been relevant? And where did you ultimately start to step into that?
Gosh, I love the specificity in your question, because, that is who I am in this moment, in this time, in this space. But as everybody's story goes, I haven't always been that way. I think I have always wanted to be somebody who has left a room better than they found it. What's really interesting is I have a memory, very vivid memory of my mom sitting me down when I was a child, both my brother and I, and my younger brother hadn't come along yet, and she had sat the two brothers down and she had made us turn around and look at a room. And she said, "What do you see?" And we were looking into our living room, which was a small space. And I was like, couches, TV, pot plant. And she goes, no. What else do you see? I was like, oh, my shoes, oh, my cup, my plate. And she said, whenever you leave a room, you need to leave that room better than you found the room. And you have to turn around at the threshold of the door as you were exiting. And you have to ask yourself, am I leaving this room better than I found it? Now, I must have been 6 years old. And I remember thinking at the time, like, this is crazy. But every single time I left a room, my mom would say, turn around and ask the question. And so I would have it ingrained in me to leave the room better than you found it. I would also go as far as to say my whole life, I've always been somebody, maybe you want to call it an aged soul, somebody who has a different level of awareness. I remember being around about the same age, and there were these two boys, and they were picking on a girl. She was a little overweight, and they were calling her Piggy or something like that, Piggy in the middle. I have a vivid memory of them name calling her. And these were my friends. And I got up and I went and sat with her, and I just said, hey guys, it's easy for you to do, but you don't know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of what you think is a seamless joke. And I don't think that that's cool. And I was at that moment ready to risk my only friends. And I only had 7 friends, guys in my class, 18 kids in my graduating class. And so I was in that moment putting a stake in the sand saying, no, I want to be back. I just knew energetically, emotionally, karmically, that's not okay. But your question was very clear and very specific. When did I start being that way? And man, let me tell you, the real story is I always wanted to be what everybody else wanted me to be. I always showed up the way I thought people wanted me to be. And that was not me. That was the least congruent version of who I am. I was so far out of alignment because I was deeply and profoundly insecure. So I was the kid who always made jokes. I was the clown. I was the funny guy. I didn't do homework. I didn't study. And I was always trying to be loud. I was trying to take up space. Everybody could see me, notice me. And by default, I actually didn't always leave the room better than I found it because people would be annoyed with, oh my God, here's this guy, he's trying again. We've all been in the room with that guy that's too busy trying to fit in. And that was me for the longest time. And so it wasn't until I was about 26 years old that I actually start to reestablish my self-worth and create that shift so that I could start walking into rooms as the fuller expression of who I am. Now, notice I said the fuller, not the full expression. I'm 46 now and I'm showing up in my full expression of who I am. But that was a 20-year plus journey.
Yeah. And I'm going to challenge it a little bit deeper because that's a beautiful answer, by the way. I love that you gave the origin and the source, both in the exercise with your mom and a situation when you were a kid that you learned to advocate for another. But also what you're really shifting into is a greater sense of awareness and ownership into when you started to actively choose to be open enough to allow all your superpowers to actually be felt by the world, right? There's nuance though in what you said. And this is why I'm going to challenge you back a little bit further. You may not have been able to show up as the fuller expression of yourself. However, I believe that based on your heart and even just the 2 stories that you told me, you have always made every room you've walked into better. Now, maybe not in the same way that you do today. Maybe not as accessible as you do today. Maybe not as transformational as you do today. Maybe not as aware as you do today. But here's where I struggle when I hear people say something like that, when I believe so deeply, and your stories have suggested and proven it. It's difficult sometimes when we live behind shame and insecurity and lack of worth to be able to see the value that we've added in the times when we've felt that way. However, my challenge back to you again is, yes, you were hidden. Yes, you were armored. Yes, you were still reserved. Yes, you were not the more full version that you're continuing to become. But if you're really honest with yourself, and not for the sake of congruence, but just whatever it was in that time, aren't you somebody who's always left every room and every interaction better, or at least your intent was that way?
Yes, I can 100% say that. Challenge accepted. My intent has always been grounded in, not necessarily just leaving a room better than I found it, but I've just always wanted to be somebody who connected with individuals, supported and uplifted and inspired and encouraged. I was a motivator from a very young age, if you want to call me that.
Yeah.
Wanting to be class president, wanting to be the leader of whatever it was that was happening in an effort to improve. And, so I'll take that because my intention was there. I don't necessarily believe I always carried it across the finish line, but man, yes, I was grounded in wanting to.
Thank you for leaning into that, because I have a very hard time in the time that I've spent with you and listening to you to also not allow you to own all of what you were in those periods. But this is the big distinguishing factor that I think brings it down to the congruence piece, right? Which is that the world never judges us based on our intent. They only ever judge us based on what our words, actions, and behaviors communicate to them. And I can say the same thing with you. I've always had the right intent, but big energy, big intent delivered through armor is confusing as fuck for people as well. And so as much as I always had the good heart and the good intent, and I was a good person and I did create positive impact, nowhere near to the level that I believe I'm able today. Yet I want to ground this because I think there's often people who aren't able to see all of the good because of whatever their words, actions, and behaviors have communicated independent to that intent. And you're such a beautiful lived example of that. And so thank you for playing with me in that space. You did reference some of those early stages, and I loved that nuanced story with your mom. In fact, my wife and I are trying to integrate this see-do mentality with our kids, right? Who both have their own neurodiversities and are ADHD and like seemingly don't see any mess. And I love the simplicity of that because it's kind of that same concept of see and do. But you also talked about your upbringing and some of the values and things that were ingrained with your mom and the siblings and the dynamics. And let's also speak to the truth that you were born and grew up in South Africa. And so why don't you give a little bit of understanding as to that 6-year-old and what did those 20 years look like between 6 and 26 when congruence started to be able to be more accessible for you?
Gosh, this is going to be such a rich conversation, Brian, because I think about the level of depth that you have as the awareness of the development of the human brain, of the program, of the psyche, of the unconscious mind. At 6.5 years old, I went to my very first day of school. I walked in and I was absolutely terrified. I mean, I don't think up until that point I'd ever been scared a day in my life. The thought of leaving my mom, leaving the safety of my home, my little kindergarten, which was colorful because we all wore whatever we wanted to wear. We were finger painting and it felt so joyful. And growing up in South Africa, the school system there was very military styled. So you wore a uniform and, blazer, tie, gray pants, gray shirt, gray jacket, gray everything. And it felt so drab. And my brother, who was 3 years older, is 3 years older than me, he hated going to school. And so he would tell me about how terrifying it was, how horrible the teachers were. And, people would be whipped or caned and punished. And I was just so scared to now go to this big school. And I remember saying to my mom, please don't leave me there. Don't leave me there. And she did what every good mother would do. She left me there. And as she left, I stood there with my 2 toes, pigeon-toed, holding my little lunchbox and backpack, thinking like, oh my God, I'm all alone. And then the teacher recognized me. When someone looks at you and you get that like little glimmer and you see they know you. And then I felt relief. I'll never forget the feeling of like, oh my God, she knows me or she knows my family. Like, I'm going to be okay. And then she says, are you Carl's brother? And I'm like, yes, I am. And she says, well, if you're as dumb as your brother, you're going to spend the whole year on the dunce's chair. And so she called me stupid and made me sit on the stupid chair. And then she put a red hat, like a witch's hat with the word dunce on it. And I didn't know what the word dunce meant. And so she said, dunce means stupid. And I had that thought like, of course I don't know what dunce means, because if you're stupid, you don't know what stupid is stupid. And I remember looking at the kids who all looked at me like, good God, like that's what stupid looks like. And, I had about 18 kids in that class at the time. And I wasn't the first, I wasn't the last, I wasn't the only kid to ever sit on that chair. But let me tell you, for me, it was a defining moment because I had that realization that an older authority figure said I was stupid and that she was a teacher and she'd been doing it a long time. And so I've shared the story thousands of times. So I hope I don't lose, the intensity in the moment when I say, I just identified from that day forward, I'm stupid. I had said to you in the beginning, I never really did homework. I was the class clown. I was the laugh, the joke. I was the guy trying to make up for it. I remember teachers asking questions in school and I knew the answer, but I wouldn't raise my hand because I didn't want to get the answer wrong. I remember when I was called to answer a question, my tongue got so thick, my mouth got so dry. I lost function literally between the left and the right brain. Everything in my mind, my body went out of coherence and I was like, and then I again was named stupid or dumb or not good enough. And so that became my story. That became my narrative. Add insult to injury, the majority of the kids that I went to school with came from very, very wealthy families. We did not come from a wealthy family. We had love. We had a nice, safe home. I had a beautiful childhood. I have never regretted where I came from, the environment I was in. I thanked my parents thousands of times in saying, I want to give my kids the life you've given me. But there was something lacking. We didn't have freedom. We didn't have opportunity. We didn't have money. We didn't have brand new school clothes or school shoes. My first job was 8 years old. I was at 8 years old. I was delivering newspapers with my brother. At 10 years old, I worked in a butchery, then a bakery, then a liquor store. I worked every weekend and every vacation and sometimes after school just so I could have some of the things that my friends had. The reason I share any of that with you is not to tell you, oh my God, my life was so bad, because it wasn't. It was just that I used all of that as further evidence and validation. Rudi's not good enough and Rudi's not worthy. And so when Rudi wanted to show up in a room and create impact, when Rudi wanted to be a leader in the world, man, he was just looking at everything saying, dude, who's going to look at you? Who's going to listen to you? You're a dum-dum. And I just remember that feeling of dum-dum over and over and over again. And so, I had one of those childhoods which really could have been beautiful, but I had this lens on that nothing was working for me. The life was against me, that God didn't love me. I'll never forget. I don't know if I've ever shared this on a podcast, but I remember my parents had a full standing mirror in their bedroom. And I remember walking out of their bathroom one day towards the door and seeing the mirror. And I stopped and I got on my knees. And I remember looking in the mirror and having a conversation with God and saying, God, why would you forget me? Why would you not give me any talent? I don't have any talent, because we had just had a talent day at school and kids sang or played a musical instrument or, wrote poetry and I had nothing to offer. And I was like, how is it that I don't have a singing voice? Well, I can't dance. None of these things. I'm not talented in sport. And that really, just that moment encapsulates what were those 20 years like for me.
That is powerful. And it's amazing to me to hear the level of detail and the connecting points that you are able to articulate. One, it's not surprising because of the work that I know you do and have done on yourself, but it is somewhat surprising to hear a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old having some of the internal dialogue that you did. Right? I think many people feel it, associate with it, maybe shrink, but you are able to articulate it so well. Now, maybe not as well when you were 6 or 7, and you've just articulated that very well over time. And that's similar to my story. However, you speak about it so clearly. You also gave a very big distinguishing factor that I need to pause on. You said, we were not wealthy. We had love. And I pause there because there are many people that don't have love. They don't have the emotional safety. They don't have the built-in belief, encouragement, empowerment, things that I've heard you embed and already layer in as credit and gratitude towards your family and your parents, despite whatever lack of freedom you felt that you guys had because of finances. And so it's interesting because wealth to me includes way more than monetary riches. In fact, it's time, relationships, and health, and love being probably the most universal, that we can live a wealthy and abundant life if that can exist. However, it's curated internal in your home, which is somewhat unique because many people don't have that, and they're unpacking that stuff later. But you're very clear then on the contrast between what you had at home and what the outside world gave you, and the narratives that were associated with each. And so I want you to sit with just the two words, wealth and love. How were you raised to define those two words? And how do you define them today?
I want to go back one step before we take a few steps forward.
Yeah.
As a child, not just 6, 7, 10, 12, 15, all the years, I looked at all the external things to find the validation for what I believed was missing within. That's why my program and my show and my community is all the Inpowered life, not empowered, Inpowered, because it is all, it's within us. But I beautifully had a curated life gifted to me through tremendous validation that I had to look everywhere else but within, until I had exhausted everything and then realized, I've always had it. It's always been within me. The thing with money is that it's so easy to see when someone has or doesn't have money.
Yes.
And sure, you can have somebody who has tremendous wealth and they choose to hide the wealth and live a simple life. I mean, Warren Buffett is a tremendous example of that. But when someone has money, you know they have money. You go to their house and you're 7 or 8 years old, you open the fridge and they've got soda cans in the fridge. And I was like, you could get soda cans at home? Like, I didn't even know there was a thing. I didn't know it was possible. I knew stores had them. I knew restaurants had them, but I didn't know that we could have them. And my friend's like, yeah, help yourself. What do you want? Coke, Sprite? Like, I was like, whoa, like that to me was just so far out of my reality. So I could see somebody else had wealth. Well, what I didn't know and what people aren't taught and what isn't shown is how much love is in that home. And so you can't measure what is your love because you just think everyone has the love that you have. And so when you show up in somebody else's house, you look at what they have and you're not measuring something you can't see because they're not talking about how much love is in their house. I grew up with a friend, and I won't go into any specifics, but we were 20 years old when he shared with me that his mom and dad were and or are alcoholics. They would take tremendous amount of pharmaceutical drugs and drink alcohol. And every night, one of the parents would pull out a gun and eventually shove it into one of the parents' mouths. And this would then rotate night after night. And that's the home he grew up in. 6, 7, 8, 10. But they had so much money. He got a boat for his 16th birthday. He got a car for his 17th. He got all these things. So I was only measuring the external things. But this man did not grow up in a safe home, in a safe environment with parents that loved him, saw him, valued him, and appreciated him. And so when I measure the difference between the two today, my vantage point is so different because that's why I said I come from a beautiful, loving home, a very safe home. Yeah. But, that's not necessarily something that a child is looking to measure. To answer your question a little bit deeper, because I do love story. I think that when people hear story, they are able to translate the lesson in everything. And I think we all have lessons in every moment, in every day, in every way. I was around about 13 years old and a teacher had stood in front of the classroom and she said, we're going to do a quick question. And I just want you to stand up, pop up as fast as you can and shout out, who do you want to be when you grow up? And so she went through the class and we had around about 20, 25 kids at that time in the class. And when she got to me, I didn't know who I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. And so when I jumped up, the words came out of my mouth, I want to be a millionaire by 25. And the entire classroom laughed at me. I'm talking headbutt your desks, belly laughed like there's no way on earth. Oh my gosh, really? You would say that? And that was in my mind speaking into what did Rudi really feel like he needed. He believed that if he had money, he would be respected. If he had money, he would be equal. If he had money, he was worth something. And, my journey, and it depends on where you want to take this podcast, but I eventually achieved that. You asked me where was my moment, and that was 26 years old, multimillionaire, sitting in a loft apartment, 2 stories overlooking the city, sports car, thinking, God, life is great. And I realized, man, I'm still sitting on the dancer's chair with the dancer's hat. I'm still unworthy. My girlfriend's cheating on me. My best friends are stealing my money. Like my life is in shambles. Like it looks good, but it isn't good. And so, my relationship has been very heavily skewed because I was believing that all these things were going to make me happy. But I think the benefit of your question is so much deeper than the question that the audience is hearing. And so for the benefit of everyone listening, I want to bring this back to the audience. Everyone's story is perfectly, carefully, beautifully, and divinely curated to serve the person that they are getting to become. So as you hear these words, your story is in the process of the unfolding, not of who you need to be, but who you are becoming. And I share that because in the becoming of who you came here to be, who only you were qualified to be, you are going to create profound change and impact out and in the world. I went through a tremendous amount of pain and hurt and suffering and struggle, and all of that made me look everywhere for validation. And today, I happen to be in an environment where I support people, I move and motivate teams of, 1 to 10,000 to 30,000. And the most beautiful thing is I can relate to almost every single person because of the experiences that I was so beautifully qualified for, and remind people of the divinity of who they are and that everything that they believe will give them something is already in them. And that when we shift our focus to that today, everything else comes to us so much faster.
It is 100% the truth. And again, spoken as someone who clearly has done the work. I so appreciate the way you ground things and bring them back to clarity in the lesson. Because to your point exactly, that's all that really matters in these discussions is where someone can glean a lesson, shorten their own curve to learning, gather a perspective that shortens their curve on their own path. It's a really beautiful thing to be able to witness you navigate all of this. And you and I share a very similar path with very different details, right? And both of us had very early financial success as well. And so I want to ground that and start and actually also bring it to, yes, you talked about I was a millionaire living in this loft apartment and all these pieces. But if you look at what led to the financial success in the first iteration of your life, 25, 26, when you arrived to the stated goal as a kid, the beginning point when you started to realize that maybe it wasn't everything you thought it was cracked up to be. What was the path that got you there? Meaning, like, what were you doing? How did you show up? What were the things that drove you to that level of monetary success? And at what point did you start to shift it?
I'm going to answer your question by taking a few steps back again, because I think the audience needs just a little more context. I was 16 years old sitting in a high school gymnasium, and they had brought in a special assembly together, and we didn't know what or why. And this man walks up on stage, pinstripe suit, blue, crisp pinstripe shirt, and he just looked like money. This man looked like success, and he just had that swagger, and he was a father of one of the students. And he walked up on stage, he took that microphone, and he said to all these kids sitting on the wooden floor, you can have and be and do and achieve anything. And my hair on my body stood literally at attention. I felt like God tapped me on the shoulder and said, Rudi, tap, tap, tap. This is what you're going to do with your life. I had come alive. It's like I felt who I was, what my purpose was, what my pain was, who I was going to be, and everything in my life, literally, viscerally, in an instant, changed. When that moment finished, these hours speaking to the students, I said to my friends, like, oh my God, wasn't that the most incredible thing you've ever seen? And my friends were like, no, dude, whatever, man, let's go play soccer. Like, they couldn't care. But I had changed. I knew who I was. I knew who I was going to be. But here's the kicker. The very next thought was, who's going to listen to you, dum-dum? And then you've never achieved anything worthy of celebration. Are you going to stand on a stage and tell people how to be a loser? Like who's going to listen to you? And so I remember thinking, I have to create that wealth. I need to become the millionaire. I need to have a business. I need to do these things, because when I have done that, then people will say, oh, well, he's successful, so now we should listen to what he has to say. Not thinking that in everybody's life there's value and worth and meaning. No, only when you've achieved success do you have value and worth and meaning. So I had this random idea that I would own 15 companies, all in different areas, so that I would be, safe from any form of recession or any poverty strike. And again, there was just a lack mentality thought, but here I was, and focused and dedicated. And so I started all kinds of businesses. I worked in the cruise industry in America, and I would make $5 or $10 or $20,000. And then I would put it into a business in South Africa, which was 16 times the US dollar rate. And so I was rich, and I would buy a car wash, and then I would buy a carpet cleaning business. And then I would buy these machines that you would put into stores, and they would make me, incremental money. And I just was growing and growing in business and adding and wanting to continue to grow. The reason I share the story is because the value is not in what I was able to achieve and attain in the house and the car, etc. It was in having all those things that I realized I had nothing, because I was working on a broken program. The majority of people that are listening to this episode today, as hard as it is to hear, you are working on a broken program, because we've been lied to, we've been disillusioned to believe that you have to hustle, you have to grind, you have to outwork, you have to compete. And that is the old masculine frequency. That frequency worked for a very long period of time, because you do. If you wake up early, you're going to outperform. If you work harder, if you manipulate, if you cheat, if you lie just a little to get your way, yes, you will become successful. Eventually, you will outwork, outbeat, and outperform. That model is no longer working in today's day and age. And so for people that hear the word masculine frequency or masculine energy, if you think that that's only for men, then you are very wrong. I work mostly in corporate America. The bulk of my clients are very powerful, successful women running very large organizations as men. What I mean is they make decisions like a man. They think like a man. They talk like a man. They show up like man because they were trained by men. And when I say the old frequency is no longer operating the same, it's when we realize we can fall into flow. We can pause. We can breathe. We can feel. I genuinely think that's where our connection so deeply comes from, because we are two people that feel the same about who we are, where we're going, what we're doing, and wanting to be able to support people. The majority of my clients say to me, I have everything and I'm so unhappy, or I don't know who I am, or I'm so lost. And that, if you are hearing these words and you've had that thought, and that thing you bought didn't make you feel good, or it did for a minute, but then there was another thing you needed, then you're running the old program. And it's about being able to learn, how do you show up in today's day and age, and how can you be a better version of yourself today, where you have kindness and compassion and love at the center of every decision that you make. And when you show up to work, and you work because it's something you want to do, it's something that you love because you're pouring into something, but then you pause and you go and you do the same amount of attention and effort into your marriage and into your children and into every single facet of life, because I believe that that is the most successful version of who we can be, is when we have this beautiful picture where everything is colorful and we haven't just colored one area of our life. Because I alluded to earlier, I had money at 26, I had businesses at 26, but my girlfriend was cheating on me, and I knew. And I didn't do anything about it because I wasn't good enough to date somebody who wouldn't. And I had friends who would say, hey, can I borrow 30 grand? I promise you I'll give it back. And then they would be like, what? I didn't get money from you. What are you talking about? Oh no, dude, are you crazy? And then I would let it go because I didn't deserve better friends than that. And all of that was me working on that old program of hustle, 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 outwork, outperform, ignoring every other area. And so if you are listening to this, the question you should be asking yourself is, where do you fall on that scale? Do you still believe in the hustle and grind, or are you in the process of shifting and moving and reevaluating? Because I'm going to tell you now, life gets so good, so beautiful, so rich, and so meaningful when you start to operate in the new paradigm.
And I do want to call attention as well for those that are listening, because what you just said is very powerful. Do you believe? But I often find that there can be a misalignment between what we intellectually believe based on what we've learned and what we've chosen and where we're going, and what our bodies or our cellular memory believe and what they still try to convince us of based on the patterns of our past. And so when those things don't seem congruent, it starts to challenge people's ability to continue to move forward around the reprogramming and the new belief system, because it does take time and it is pattern recognition and there's a whole lot involved. You're right, exactly on the point around this idea of masculine and feminine. And to the point that many people don't realize that masculine and feminine exists within all of us at all times. It's which one is dominant by default, and how are we able to manipulate that state so that we know where we're supposed to be or how we're allowed to get things done. Because there is a time to do, there is a time to build, there is a time to exist in the masculine energy, but there is also times for us to be able to enjoy it, rest, recover, receive, and be in a flow state where we can seemingly get the same or greater results with way less effort. And I know you understand this to all the detail that I'm describing, but you're also talking about these women that are operating as men as the masculine paradigm is starting to shift. And you have to have very innate knowledge and understanding of both how your own frequencies are moving and evolving in your current state, as well as to be able to read someone else. And so we're jumping all around in portions of this interview, and you keep grounding us in pieces contextually that are appropriate. But you've talked about this transition. And what I'm going to say right now, just looking up at the clock, is I know for a fact we're going to do a second interview, and we're going to do this soon, because we're not going to have enough time to get to all the places that I know I want to cover in depth with you. So everyone who's listening, there will be a part 2, and there will be a part 2 before too long. And Rudi, I think you're the first part 2 I've ever done in 130 plus episodes on the show. So if that doesn't say a lot about my connection with you, I don't know what does.
I'm honored, brother.
But here's where I'm going with this. There's lots of unconscious and lots of blindness in the early parts of the story. There's also lots of gap between 26 and 46 where you are today. And I know we'll fill in those pieces where we need to. The biggest question for the moment to land and answer is, and we're going to come full circle to masculine and feminine, but the biggest question right now is, when did you realize that the path you were on and the programming that you were existing with at 26, 27 in all of these lived experiences, full bank account empty inside. When did you realize and when did you choose to start updating your programming?
So I know that it was 26 years old because it was my birthday. I had been working abroad, making US dollars, investing it into South African businesses. I was, as I had said, doing very well. I had at one point in time purchased this 2-story loft apartment. I had purchased it sight unseen. I called my banker and said, I want it. He actually, did everything for me. I hadn't even signed a single piece of paper yet. The banking system is very different in South Africa. And so I had been abroad. I'd owned it for 6 or 7 months. And then I flew into South Africa, into the city where I owned this, took the keys, and in one weekend, I furnished this entire 2-story apartment. Now, I want you to think about Pretty Woman here for a second, right? I want that. I'll take that. I'll take that. It was like one of those dream weekends. I don't know if anyone listening to this has ever fantasized, because God knows I have, about just having like a shopping spree.
Yeah.
And I fully furnished a 3-bedroom apartment, walking in and just saying, I'll take that, deliver that. And I bought everything. And within the 2 days, meaning the Friday night was when I got the keys. So all of Saturday, all of Sunday night, I'm sitting in my apartment and it's fully furnished and everything's brand new. And I've just finished putting the last screws in the legs of the chair. I sit back. I've got boxes to unpack, sure, but I'm sitting there in that moment and I am supposed to feel like I have arrived. Like literally, Ryan, the king in the castle, right? I'm supposed to feel that way. I'm at the top of the world. And here I am sitting on my couch with my favorite meal in front of me. I opened up a very expensive bottle of wine. I was going to celebrate me. I was going to celebrate life. I was going to celebrate success. And I started crying because I realized I was still broken inside. I still felt like the 6-year-old dunce. I didn't even eat the meal. I didn't even drink the wine. I sat there and I was like, man, why do I still not feel like I'm good enough? I share this with you. Please know it's only to emphasize the point. I was wearing $2,000 jeans. This is 20 years ago. And I was supposed to feel like the man. And I sat there like a joke. The guy that would put $100 bill on his bill folder so everyone could see. Like I was doing all the things to try and fulfill that thing missing. And there was no one around, not even a TV on. I was alone with me. And I was like, none of this has changed anything. I'm still not respected. I'm still not appreciated. I'm still not valued. But here's the answer to your question. I took out a yellow legal pad and I wrote down on the piece of paper, like, am I worthy? And then I started writing out all of the things that I could think of that deemed me worthy. And the first thing I wrote on that paper was, I paid cash for everything in here. And the only reason I said that was because I was like, if I'm at 26 able to do what my parents have never been able to do, there has to be something in that is worthy. Not the money. Like, let's forget the money. The work, the effort, the attention, the hustle, the grind, all the things, the respect I had from the people that helped me build what I'd built. I have to have something about me that's worthy. I then wrote down, I have 60 plus employees. I'm responsible for at least 180 lives when I start counting, husbands, wives, potential children. Like there's 180 people I'm responsible for. They trust me. I have to be worthy. And then I went to the next and the next and the next. And I ended up filling an entire page of a legal pad. And there was evidence that was on now black and white. It was a yellow pad, but literally black and white. I could look at that said, hey, Rudi, there is something about you that's worthy. In the beginning, it was monetary stuff and it was success and it was accolades. And then eventually it got down to things like, you're a good guy. You're a great best friend. You're an awesome boyfriend. I wrote out all the qualities. And one of the last things on the paper that I wrote out was, Rudi, you are actually wicked freaking smart. Like a genius. And the reason I wrote that was because my whole life I believed I was stupid. Well, I also never studied. I never did homework. I never, ever, ever, ever studied for exams. And somehow I still passed. And my grades weren't that bad. But for somebody who never studied, I was like, you have to have some level of intelligence if you've never applied yourself. if you've started businesses, if you've achieved these things. And so that was the beginning of my relationship. Now, we spoke about the masculine and the feminine, and I'm going to tell you at 26, I did not have the mental understanding of that conversation. If you'd come to me with that, it would have been like, I don't even know what you're trying to say to me. But journaling is a very feminine prospect, like sitting with yourself and going through this project of writing out. Like, I would never have picked up a pen and a paper and asked myself, how are you feeling? I'd be like, dude, I don't do that. That's for girls. Like, that would have been my thought process. But I just wrote that out because in that moment, that was my last hope. I didn't even know why I was doing it, but I did it. The interesting thing is, when you start to journal, man or a woman, you bypass the unconscious. You bring the conscious forward. You're now present. I talked today about presence is power. I literally will stand in front of an entire team of people saying your power is in your presence. And when you're present, it's not present with your kids, present with your wife, present with your life. And when you are present in your life, man, now you're in control. You're driving the bus. And the first time I put pen to paper was when I became present to what were the thoughts going on in my mind, not just having the thought, but now actually aware of the thought. And then asking the question, why am I aware of the thought? There are incredible books today that speak into the most powerful words that you can ask is it even true? So if we just take those 4 words, I started asking those questions without knowing the science, without the data, without having read the book. Man, is it even true that I'm stupid? Is it even true that I'm not worthy? Is it even true that this is the relationship I deserve? It didn't change overnight is the answer, but it was the beginning of that journey. And it was around about a 10-year journey of self-discovery, of really going inward, diving into who I am. I've been a spiritual, seeker since I was a kid, really, really young age. But this was where I started taking a new level of ownership for me, for my mind. That's when I started studying neuroscience and the brain and human behavior. And because I wanted to fix me, because I still thought I was broken. And in that journey was when I started to create the shift and my life started to change and my career changed. And, we could spend hours just in that, 10-year period alone.
Well, I mean, there's a ton that's wrapped into that whole answer. And what I was going to ask, it was really helping understand, yes, you started with those actions, but what did that evolution in that process look like? I know we're not going to have time to unpack that today. And so I think that's the conversation we're going to save for the next piece, which is going to, I'm sure, lead into so many other elements of this conversation. I have to know, though, you've referenced working on cruise ships multiple times. What were you doing on cruise ships?
So I always go back before I go forward. I was finally in South Africa at a point where I was doing really well financially. I was part of like a franchise restaurant organization. I had all these things going for me. And my mom said to me, Rudi, you need to travel the world. Like, there's a whole world out there. Go see the world. I had friends that all said to me, oh my gosh, I've just backpacked Europe. You've got to go travel the world. I had a brother working in the cruise industry in America saying, dude, there's so much money here. There's so many cool American chicks on cruise ships. You got to come. And I was like, no, dude, I'm focused because I was trying to build this life that I had this idea of. And on Easter Sunday, 6 men walked into my restaurant and held us up in an armed robbery. One of the men put me down on my hands and knees, put a gun to my face, and told me that was the last thing I was ever going to see. He pulled back the cock of the gun, and then I literally looked at the gun, down the barrel, and then like paid attention to every detail, like him, his hands, his eyes, his hair, everything. And I was like, that's it. That's what I'm going to see. And they ended up not shooting me, and they left. There's a whole story that's attached to that. I was the only person out of all of the places they robbed. It was a syndicate that they didn't actually kill the owner or the manager.
Wow.
But in that moment, I had been spared. They left. But when they left, I became very, very fearful. Every time a person walked through the front door of the restaurant, I just panicked. I was like, oh my God, am I going to be robbed again? And it's like that PTSD, that panic set in. And one day it got so bad, I just messaged my brother and I said to him, I need to get out of South Africa. I've had so much crime. I've had so many things. That was the 4th time a gun had been put to my head, just for context. And so I had just said, I'm done. Like, I have to get out. And so I said, get me a job on a cruise ship. And he did. He went and applied and put my name forward. My first job, which I did for 1 year, was working in a retail location, folding t-shirts, selling liquor, and then eventually selling jewelry. And then I started like scoping out where are the really good paying jobs on board. And I then sold high-end artwork like Rembrandt, Picasso, Peter Max's, like just incredible, like as an art auctioneer, art auctioning paintings on board. I did that for about 3 years. And then I found the real money was in speaking and standing on stage and talking about all the ports of call and the jewelry you can buy and the places you can go. And again, just for emphasis for the audience, we're always being qualified for who we're going to become. And I literally had a career in learning how to stand on a stage and speak and move and motivate people. But I was doing it to, hey, go here and buy this, eat this, drink that. But yeah, that's what I did. And it was incredible. Side note, people don't realize this, but a cruise ship is a small universe. Mm-hmm. There are people from all over the world, hundreds of nationalities, hundreds, all living in peace and harmony.
Yep.
All different walks of life, all different backgrounds. Man, talk about what an incredible, eclectic place to live, to be, and to experience. And then you come back onto like a land life and you're like, and how are we not getting along? How is there division when you have this incredible place to see what does it look like when we can actually come together as one?
It is a very powerful subset of what can be possible. And there's little micro subsets of that, to your point, looking for evidence that can exist everywhere if we're paying attention and we're looking for it. Perspective to me is like pain. And I always say that perspective and pain always point us towards what's important if we're paying attention. So much of what you talk about today is perspective, right? I believe that life is all about contrast, right? It's not just about the white and the gray, but the gift is often in the gray area. And I love how you talk about presence, because I don't know if I've shared this with you before, but I often tell people that your presence is your present. You are the gift, right? Each and every one of us are, but it's about how we capture that presence. And so as we look at these dynamics, and dude, I just totally lost my train of thought. I'm going to say this and own this in front of everybody. I had it like right there. The perspective. That's what I wanted. Talk to me about when you started to learn to tap into and seek perspective. And what has the role of perspective played in your life?
You know, the answer to that is it's everything. And I want the audience to really make sure you're in a space to receive this. Your presence is your power. Every time you're not present in your body, you're not present in your mind, you're not present in the moment, a program, a circumstance, a situation, something else is dictating where you're going, what you're doing, and how you're going to show up. And if you're living your life right now and there's a dream or a goal on your heart that you haven't yet achieved, haven't been able to attain, it's because something else is preventing you from moving in the direction of where it is that you want to go. And that if you learn and you hone the skill. So as I answer the question, I want you to be thinking about this. I need to underscore this, underline it, highlight it. I need, massive microphones to come on to emphasize this is you have to learn how to hone your skill of being present in your mind and in your body. The short answer is, I was 32 years old. I had a successful 7-figure company in Cincinnati. I'd immigrated. I'd got married. My life, was all new. I'd done all this inner work. I was still in the journey, but I'd done so much inner work. And then my business relationship soured. And now I was stuck with 2 business partners with so much money wrapped in it. I had no savings. So all my money was gone because it was in the business and I couldn't get out of the business. So I was like married to 2 people I didn't want to be married to, essentially in the business, right? And I would come home from work to my actual marriage and my wife would be like, I don't want to hear about your work anymore. I don't want to hear about what's going on. Like, I can't deal with this negative word vomit that you keep bringing home every day. And so I had to deal with this inner turmoil of wanting to fight and be angry and resentful and mad because of what was going on at work. And so the only reprieve that I got was sitting on my couch. So I would wake up at 4 or 5 in the morning and I would breathe in and out and in and out and in and out in an effort to release stress, fear, and anxiety. About 10 years before that, I read a book and I don't know who the author is. I think it was Deepak Chopra, but I must have been 16, 17, 18 years old. And I'd read a book about a candle exercise where you picture a candle in your diaphragm. And if it's, flittering, then that's anxiety. And if you can calm the candle, you can calm your emotional state, you can calm your body. And so I remembered that. And I was like, I need to do that. So I sat on the couch, 5 o'clock in the morning, picturing a candle in my stomach. And as I would breathe in, I would focus on that candle flame, and the anxiety in my guidance system in my stomach would tell me that I was in heightened stress. And so I would focus on the candle until it became calm. And as I imagined that candle calm, I noticed I was present. And as I felt that, I didn't know it was presence. I didn't know I was consciously, presently aware of my life, my feelings, my thoughts, my behaviors. I just really enjoyed what it felt like to be Rudi. Now, for the benefit of the audience, when you are in your centered self, that's what I call it, your centered self, you are connected to the divinity, the tapestry that is flowing to you and through you, that knows everything that ever was, is, that will ever be. That is where your genius lies. That's where your brilliance lies. That's where Michael Jackson wrote every one of his number one hits from. That is where all creativity is birthed. Most of us are numbing it through alcohol or drugs or sex or TV or porn or whatever it is, so that we don't feel. And the thing that we're avoiding is the genius and the brilliance that is within us. And so my act of releasing stress and fear and anxiety so I could just not feel like killing my business partners or being angry or resentful was my greatest gift. Now, I'm simplifying this because it was a 4-year journey of going through pain that brought me to the moment of finally saying, I need to sit with me. But when I did that, I honed the ability to know myself and to know what I felt like. So when I stood up from that couch after doing that for 20 minutes, an hour, and I went into my day and I would lose my temper, I'd get frustrated, I'd have a thought of resent or anything, I would say, whoa, I've deviated from me. And I would put myself back in my car and I would breathe in and out until I became calm. And then I'd go back into my life and I'd carry on. And I would repeat that cycle again and again and again and again. And for anyone that's listening to this thinking, because I'm going to tell you now, the majority of people are going to hear this, they're going to say it makes sense, and they're not going to do it because no one wants to do the work. We just want to reap the reward. We don't want the work. We just want the result. And I'm going to tell you, I did that. And inside of 90 days, my entire life transformed. But I religiously did that 3, 4, 5 times a day, bringing myself back to my center, stopping the patterns of the past. I stopped reacting the same. I stopped showing up the same. I stopped looking for evidence of the same. And so essentially my life completely transformed. More money, better relationships, business partners magically left my business. It was amazing. Like you could not have created a better story for how it transformed. And I believe it was directly tied to my ability to be present in my mind, my body, and then I could take accountability for what I'd been doing and what I was going to do next. And so in doing that, I created tremendous change.
What you just gave was also a tool that's also essentially allowing people to tap into the masterclass of creating that congruence in the difference of belief between intellect and what your body is experiencing, right? It allows you to actually center and come back to that place and regroup. But what you also just gave was a masterclass in how you can compress time and transformation. It's about doing the work, and it's about doing the work regularly and consistently. To what you just said, 4 or 5 times a day. There'd be people who might do that normally 4 or 5 times a month, maybe 4 or 5 times a week. 4 or 5 times a day compounded over 90 days. You've now compressed what most people would have done in a year or 2 into that period of time. But your body also has a greater likelihood of the sustainability around the new programming actually staying, because you're even compressing time between each rep. So you're having less interference coming from the outside space. And the reason I recapped that in the way I did for the audience is truly listen back to what Rudi just told you. Listen back to this entire episode. There's multiple lessons. There's multiple actionable tools. There's perspectives and questions to consider. There's ways of thinking and evaluating. And by the way, as much as I feel like we've gone 10,000 leagues deep in this process, we're still only scratching the surface. And so we will be coming back for episode 2. We're going to unpack more around the creativity and the congruence and the alignment and everything about the empowered life and how that's shown up in different components. And so if you were intrigued or interested at any point in this, make sure you come back and listen for episode 2. But in the meantime, Rudi, in the chance that someone only hears this episode, where can they find you? Where can they follow you? What's the closing message you want to leave them with today? And know that everything will be in the show notes. So just speak from your heart for wherever you are compelled to give resources or time or space.
I know that people need information before they make any level of decision. And if you are listening to this and thinking, man, in 90 days of doing something like that, my life could potentially change, we also need to know what's in it for us. What I want you to hear is not where to find me and how to work with me and what I have to sell, because, that's irrelevant in this moment. That this really is all about you. And I mean that from the bottom of my soul. Your life is about you, and you get to live the most beautiful, fulfilling, and joyful life that is possible. And so I want you to ask yourself this question, because I can tell you now, I've done this with thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And there's a scientific number based on the data that you can transform your life in as little as 66 days. That is a scientific number, 66 days. And that part of this is that if you do what I just shared and you do it for 66 days and you got it here for free, gifted from Brian, if you just do that for 66 days, I promise you, you're going to send me or Brian a love letter and say, oh my God, you'll never believe how my life has changed, because it's taking that time to do the work. The reason I shared the 66 days is because people that are in the programs that I have, their lives transform in that amount of time. And now you know that it's possible. And people only ever do something if they know what is in it for them. And if you knew that at the end of this, you were going to be given a gift, and that gift was going to be the life of your dreams, you would do it. I want the audience to think about this, because what Brian and I just did right now was we hid $1 million in your house somewhere. And I want you to imagine if there was $1 million hidden in your home, and all you had to do was tear out the walls, the ceiling, the floor tiles, the toilet to find it. You would keep looking up to the day you find it. Even if you were at day 90, you would still keep looking for that $1 million because you were assured you would find it. Except we didn't hide $1 million in your house. There is an unlimited abundance in your home if you would spend the time once, twice, 4, 5 times a day to sit with yourself, to identify who you are, to bring back the inner dialogue where you were the driver of your life experience, so that you can have and be and do and achieve. I promise you it works 100% of the time when you do the work. My gift is in saying that every day, that as you do this work, you're going to be blessed, and it's going to be blessed in imaginable ways. But you at some point in time have to deem yourself worthy of that success. And I just hope that this episode was enough to encourage you to breathe in and out, so that you can reconnect with the brilliance and the divinity that already lies within you. For those of you that have listened to our conversation, time is your most invaluable resource. I honor you. I thank you. And I love you profoundly and deeply, because I know it's hard to live life. I know it's hard to go through struggle sometimes, and it's hard to achieve and to want and to do and to sit with yourself. And I know that I've done the work. I know Brian's doing the work. And all I want to say to you is you're worthy of the work.
Yep. Every single one of you listening is worthy of the work. And Rudi, I really appreciate the heart that you put into every single thing you do, the presence that you give us in every single place, because it does allow us to see your power. Your humility also shines through, and I appreciate the redirect back to the audience. All of that said, I'm also going to tell the audience that his humility is also grounded in his own truth, but his content and his education and his information is something that I know you will get value out of if you invest the time. And so all of his social media, all of the websites, all of the things to be able to go watch. And I will sit here and tell you, I do not typically consume other people's content. I want to be clear when I say this. I do not consume other people's content, not because I'm too good for it, not because I'm better, not any other reason other than for me, I often don't consume content because I don't want it to influence my own bias, my own language, my own cadence, my own authenticity, and my own presence. That said, I watch Rudi's content. And his content is real, it's pure, it's universal truth, and it's accessible across many different elements of language. And so please, take a few minutes. If you resonate with me, you resonate with this conversation, you will doubly appreciate Rudi. And so make that investment as well. And Rudi, thank you so much for your time, my friend. This is just the beginning for us, I know.
I appreciate you, brother. Thank you.
And for those of you that just saw Rudi flip open his lid and jump in, he had very early observations and understanding. He had awareness around the places that he was given gifts and learning and conditioning, but he also had a very unique ability to identify early on the external pressure and narratives that shaped his world. He's also very transparent and clear in the pivotal moments that it's taken for him to step back into presence so that he can allow that abundant flow to exist, that creativity to be there, but ultimately for him to feel full, not just because his bank account and his apartment full, but because his life is full, he is full, and things are aligned. All of that's possible for each and every one of you. Apply the tools he gave you today, and it's going to require you to be honest with yourself, step into truth, and ultimately flip open your lid and scan your can. We'll see you next time.
What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.